Welcome once again to Carolina Stories of the American Revolution. I'm Dallas Reese here on a very busy road. This is Highway 17 near Charleston, South Carolina. Back here is the Rantowles Creek Bridge, and I'm at the historical marker for a very important gentleman. Does his name look familiar? Washington? No, we're not talking about George, but he's his second cousin, William A. Washington. Now, George Washington, of course, descended from a different line of that family, but they both have the same great-grandfather. Now, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington was from Virginia, just like his cousin George, and he fought in the Continental Army, also directed the South Carolina militia units. Here's a lieutenant colonel. Now, his sign here says the grave of Colonel William A. Washington is 3/4 of a mile on Live Oak Plantation and Sandy Hill Plantation. Actually, he lived about 7 miles northwest of here, and his grave is right down here. And it says in 1791, he entertained his kinsman, George Washington, President of the United States. We're going to talk about that more coming up, but first, we're going to get off this extremely busy Highway 17 and make our way down to the cemetery where Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, a hero of the American Revolution, is buried. All right, here we are, Carolina Stories of the American Revolution. I'm Dallas Reese, and we have made our way down the road here from Highway 17. It's a lot quieter down here at the cemetery. And I must say a big thank you to a preeminent historian from the upstate, from Lawrence County, South Carolina, Durant Ashmore. He gave me directions to find the cemetery because I probably wouldn't have known where it was, because you have to come down this road and it doesn't really look like it's a place you would want to go, because there's reflectors up there, but it doesn't say, hey, cemetery here. And so here's the cemetery, the burial place of the famous Revolutionary War hero, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, rehabilitated by the Washington Light Infantry of Charleston, South Carolina. They rebuilt this cemetery in 1985. And by the way, interesting story, that Light Infantry of Charleston still has the flag that William Washington carried at the Battle of Cowpens on January 17, 1781. So we'll make our way into the little cemetery here and check out some of the people that are buried here. All right, as we make our way in, we'll see the most prominent grave, of course, is the grave of Lieutenant Colonel William Washington. And it says simply, in memory, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, born Stafford County, Virginia, February 28, 1752. Now, this stone says he died March 6th, 1810, but interesting note here, the family of George Washington, our first president, their genealogy, and by the way, William Washington was a second cousin to George Washington. They shared the same great-grandparents. Now, their genealogy says March 16th was his death date, and I've seen that in some other histories as well. So there's a little bit of controversy. I've seen March 10, I've seen March 6, and I've seen March 16. Of course, he did live in Charleston, South Carolina. William Washington met his wife, Jane Riley Elliott, while he was here during the American Revolution, and then he married her in 1782. Now, his wife was born March 14, 1763. She died December 14, 1830, and they had a couple of kids. Let's read what it says here. My parents, dear, lie here. That's obviously from their 2 children. And this says, to our parents, William and Martha Washington, died in Charleston, AD 1830. This is to the memory of William Washington. He is the son of Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, and he only made it to 39 years old. He died August 20, 1849. He was 39 and 5 months, and this is sacred to the memory of an infant son of William Jr. and his wife, Theodosia Narcissa Washington, and their infant son departed this life 21st of August, 1845. He was only 3 months old. Wow. So I'm going to walk around some of these other graves here. I haven't seen, this is a Williamson. I can't really read this stone, make it out too well. And then we have Mary Rowland, wife of Robert Rowan. And I imagine these are all family members or some relation, or maybe some people who bought the property after the family sold it off, because Jane, the daughter of William and Jane Washington, actually sold this property, this plantation, in 1830 after their mother's death. And here is the gravesite of William Ancrum. And I believe, yeah, he was the wife. Yeah, because there's Jane, his wife. Okay, so this is the daughter. Jane is the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel William Washington, and there's her husband, and then this is their son. Oh, they named him William Washington Ancrum, and he died in 1854, and Jane died in 1852, about 22 years after she sold this rice plantation, and her husband died in 1858. Then there's an unknown grave. So that makes more sense. Now, as far as the oldest graves in this cemetery, that honor would belong to a member of the Elliott family. This is Jane Elliott, died 1763. There's Charles Elliott. And so I think that's the mother of Jane, the wife of William Washington. And here's the second oldest grave. This one is Sarah Stanyard, wife of Archibald Stanyard. She died October 27, 1767. So yeah, these were the Elliott parents, and they were the first owners, and they owned the plantation before anybody else. And the way it worked here in South Carolina, back in that time, a lot of times the husbands would marry into the family. The wife would get, property as part of her endowment, and then they live on that plantation. And that's exactly what William Washington did with his wife, Jane Riley. They lived about 7 miles northwest of here, and they died at that plantation, but they buried them here at the family graveyard. So that's the way that went. Now, let's get into some more interesting stories about Lieutenant Colonel William Washington. A fascinating story about Lieutenant Colonel William Washington that I find. This stone was erected on February 22nd, 1930 by the Sullivan's Island Daughters of the American Revolution chapter. At the top of the stone, this is the back of his headstone, it says, Lieutenant Colonel Washington fought at Lexington, was captain of infantry, and wounded at Bunker Hill. Now, here's the deal. There's no primary or secondary source evidence that proves any of this. Nothing. I don't know where it came from and how the people at the DAR in 1930 got that info, and I haven't yet been able to do the research to discover. But here's the facts. The facts are primary source evidence shows that Lieutenant Washington was made a captain of infantry, and that was in September of 1775. That was months after this. Bunker Hill was June of 1775, and Lexington was April of 1775. So how did this get on this monument? And who at the DAR, back in the late 1920s, I guess, when they put this together, thought that? And I don't understand it. But it says he was transferred to South Carolina as Lieutenant Colonel of Cavalry. That is true. And his troop flag presented to him by Jane Riley Elliott. That is true, because the story goes from the Elliott family that when Jane Riley Elliott met Lieutenant Colonel William Washington here during the American Revolution in South Carolina, she was immediately smitten with him. He didn't have a flag, and so she made him one out of the drapes in her house, and he actually carried that flag at the Battle of Cowpens, which was one of our biggest patriot victories. And in fact, that's also a battle where William Washington fought sword, hand-to-hand with broadswords with Tarleton, Bannister Tarleton, the evil guy who, of course, killed all those people at the Battle of Waxhaws. So just another note, on the back of this stone, William Washington was born in victory at Cowpens, of course, when he was carrying that flag. And he earned the sobriquet Tarleton's Terror on the 52nd anniversary Battle of Lexington, April 19th, 1827. This flag is now called the Utah flag, was given by his widow to the Washington Light Infantry of Charleston, South Carolina, by whom this stone was erected February 22nd, 1930. Now, it says it was the infantry that erected the stone, but in the papers in 1930 that I looked up the Greenville News and the Charleston paper, it says it was the DAR chapter of Sullivan's Island. And I don't know how, It's so funny when you do this research sometimes. There's so many different sources and different things that say different things. But anyway, Lieutenant Colonel William Washington was a hero, no doubt. And he also is a forgotten hero of sorts, and one who should not be forgotten because, well, this guy was the second cousin of the first president of the United States. And by the way, The only trip George Washington ever made here to South Carolina was when he went on the big tour of the South in 1791. And who did he stay with? He stayed with his second cousin, William Washington. Also, another interesting note, there are letters preserved in the Washington family between William Washington and his cousin George, and William would send live oak saplings and other plants from here in South Carolina up to George so he could plant them at Mount Vernon. And they traded all kinds of things. In fact, George Washington had a donkey named Royal Gift, and he let it pasture here on the rice plantation of Lieutenant Colonel William Washington. So just some interesting facts there. And also, William Washington was made a brigadier general when we had a war with France. I don't know much about that, but I know 1798, he was on George Washington's staff for a couple of years. And of course, George died that following year, but William was actually working with his cousin at that point. And then he retired here to South Carolina, and he died in 1810. He was only 58 years old when he died. But there you go, a forgotten hero of the American Revolution. And you can come see this cemetery right here in Rantowles, South Carolina. It's right near Ravenel. It's right off that busy Highway 17. And I'm Dallas Reese. If you love this content, please hit like and subscribe below. And thank you so much for watching Carolina Stories of the American Revolution.